This is the Cameron Journal Podcast. It's a place where we talk about important things. It's a place where we bring a little slice of the news to you. It's a place where we do important things, have important conversations. It's also things that I like to talk about. My name is Cameron Cowan, and this is the Cameron Journal Podcast. Today on the Cameron Journal Podcast, we are speaking with Reneau Puerifoy. He is the author of Why You Feel the Way You Do. He is a therapist, marriage, family, all this type of thing. And he's written a book that helps readers move beyond their personality, DNA, and upbringing to pinpoint critical issues and self-destructive thought patterns that influence their well-being. I am very interested to find out what all this means and how this book got started and all this type of thing. So welcome to the Cameron Journal Podcast.
Well, thank you. It's good to be here.
Good. Well, why don't we start from the beginning? Why don't you tell us a little bit about your book and why you decided to write it?
Well, it's actually the fourth one I've written, and it's a little different from the other ones. The first ones were on anxiety and anger, things that I worked with in my private practice. And this one I was asked to write, and it's just a book about emotions. It's something I've been fascinated with ever since I was a kid. I used to train a lot of animals and stuff, chickens and rabbits and dogs and cats and all that stuff.
Oh, how cute.
And it basically takes the reader on a journey that goes through four different things. We start with what are emotions? Why do we have them? How do they function? Talk a little bit about kind of simple triggers, then go into more complex ones and the core response patterns that people have, both positive and negative. And then it ends with the three things that make you happy, that the so-called science of happiness, positive psychology has identified over the last 20 years as being key factors in a person's life that creates a happy life. So that's the journey that I take them on, and each chapter has a summary at the end, and it also has a whole bunch of exercises so people can take the information and apply it to their life if they want to do some of those exercises. Because one of my pet peeves has been self-help books that give you a lot of insight, but they don't tell you what to do with it. So being a clinician, I'm all about how do we apply it? How do we make changes with it?
Certainly. So what do you think is the biggest barrier to people feeling happy?
Well, the big three, the number one is not really a big mystery. It's relationship. We are wired for relationship. And unfortunately, that's something that a lot of people in our digital world don't have. I have 500 Facebook friends, but I really don't have anybody I could sit down face to face and talk to and share my life, my hurts and my the negative things as well as the positive things. All I see is these finely curated images. I want to be like the Kardashians, this type of stuff.
Yeah, I've recently thought myself, I do this and I always forget to put my phone away. Always. I do, the Cameron Journal, and that is such a huge commitment, and it takes so much hours and all this type of thing. And so I don't do a lot of the fun, exciting stuff that I see other people doing. And I'm pretty well convinced everyone else is having a pretty good time. And I've just been left behind. So I can totally see how that, and I'm sure a lot of that's just like social media perception. Like that's not reality. Like everybody has problems, but I can definitely see how that it does start to kind of weigh on you psychologically. So
they call that the fear of missing out. There's actually a term for that now. There's an interesting study in Europe, and they had people 18 to their mid-20s just basically go without internet for 2 weeks. And it was interesting. A few of them actually had almost withdrawal symptoms like heroin. Uh, but all of them found that at the end of it, they were happier. Their daily life, they on their what they call their happiness scores, they scored much happier. They were doing better, and some of that lasted for quite a long time afterwards. It's
Well, I mean, let's face it, we're not evolutionarily built or wired to have this much constant interaction with the news, things, people, opinions, all this type of thing in our faces 24/7. We're
oh
not built
yeah,
for that, like
no,
in any way, shape, or form.
and that's another thing is people don't have quiet time because they're constantly getting bombarded with things. When I first started working with anxiety disorders before the internet started, one of the things I would tell my clients is quit watching the evening news. And it was amazing how just that would improve, their symptoms a lot because they weren't getting bombarded with all the things around the world that were negative that were happening. And I said, yeah, take a newspaper, which was back then they had those. Uh, take 15 minutes, catch up on the news, but then put it away. Because again, even then, on paper, it's a little bit removed. You're not getting all these images. The old cliche: if it bleeds, it leads. And yeah, we don't have that time to just distance ourselves from it.
Yeah, it is definitely a difficult. I mean, I struggle with that because on the one hand, we live in a very perilous time. um Probably more perilous now than almost anybody alive has experienced. And I feel like that requires a level of engagement that we're not used to before, but I also see it has gone on for so many years and so much has happened that I think it's affecting people negatively.
Well, and how much engagement do you need to do? I mean, certainly you need to know what the boys down under the dome are doing, keep up with that so you can make some wise decisions. But there's not a lot I can do about what's going on in Ukraine and China and all the other places of the world. There's some things I can do, and after I do that, it's time for me to move on. It used to be, if you go back, a few centuries, there were a lot of perils. You had raiding parties and this and that coming in, but most of your news you got was from the traveling person, the troubadour, or the person who came in from the next village. And even back in World War II, you had your newsreels and stuff, and then you went on with your life. I mean, I grew up when you were ducking under your desk because the nuclear bombs were going to fall on you at any moment. And even then, though, yeah, these things are important. You have to be aware of them. But at the same time, if you're constantly got your head in that stuff, constantly listening to what the other party is doing wrong, and it's not the way that you're going to have a happy life. It's be aware, participate, but take time to disengage.
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that as being quite helpful. So, when it comes to feelings and emotions and dealing with emotional triggers and all this type of thing, it seems, not to me, but a lot of people complain. It seems like we have more more of this problem than we have ever had before. And I don't necessarily think that's true. I just think, people don't have alcoholism in the same rates that they do. And people
Right.
don't smoke anymore. And and like our grandparents had different ways of coping with it. But what's your perception? Do you think that somehow our emotional dysregulation in this country has gotten worse? Or do you think that we genuinely have a problem?
Well, there definitely is a lot more anxiety and depression. Some of the stuff obviously is because we measure it better and we recognize it. My son has ADD, and they didn't even know what that was when he was a kid. It wasn't until he was in junior high school that we actually understood what was happening with him. And by that time, the die had been cast, and so we just did the best we could. And fortunately, he's doing pretty good right now. As an adult, he's got a couple houses, he's renting out, and just really busy, busy, busy doing stuff. So I'm pleased with that. But there was a rough time there. So I think people had more institutions to help them in the past than they do now. Again, we're so isolated. People lived in small towns, communities. You had neighbors that you'd known for years. You had friends and relatives you knew for years, and that insulated you a lot. As a counselor, a lot of times what you are is a paid friend. You're just there to really listen to people. Certainly, I can offer insights. I can give them some direction. But part of it is they're connecting with somebody at a deep level that oftentimes they don't have in their life. And in the past, people had that. You had an aunt, an uncle, a parent, a minister, or somebody you could go to and talk to about stuff. Plus, you had time then to process what they had to say. And I think that gave a stabilizing influence that for many people is missing nowadays.
Yeah, I was reading on Twitter last night. Someone said that the correlation between the rise of the smartphone in 2007 and the drop off in human face to face interaction
Mhm.
correlates almost perfectly. Like the internet was bad enough, but then we put it in our pockets,
Oh,
and
yeah.
that, has basically, practically made human interaction obsolete. But not really, because we still deeply
Yeah.
crave it and need it and desire it and all this type of thing. Can't seem to get away from it. And that is a one of the most pressing problems of our time. Here's my thing though. That ship has sailed. We're not going back. We're not undoing this. So now we have to learn to live with it.
Well, exactly. And as technologies, new technologies come up, whether it's the wheel or gunpowder or TV or whatever, at first we're kind of like adolescents with it. And that's the stage we're at with a lot of our electronics right now. We're trying to figure out how do we use them in a way that benefits us. Because quite frankly, YouTube and Zoom and these types of things, there's some very positive things you can do with it as long as you use it wisely. I mean, I love the internet. I mean, I can do things that, shoot, 20 years ago, I couldn't even dream of doing. But at the same time, I leave the house, I got my garage door opener, and the door goes down. I put my Bluetooth, my ears in, I'm listening to something on the radio, somebody raving about something, or somebody telling me all the things I should be doing. I go to work, I got my little cubicle, or I'm at home in my cubicle. That's not healthy. So yeah, the electronics, they are here to stay. It's a matter of how do I use it wisely? Just like TV, how do I use it wisely?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do have to change your relationship to it all. I was interviewing someone else recently, and I said one of the smartest things I ever did was I turned off all notifications off my phone.
Oh
Like I
yeah,
don't get notifications at all. So it's like I get to kind of choose when to interact with certain apps or certain things, and some
yeah.
go days and days unchecked. Some are checked a little bit more often, but it's like I'm not my attention and my time is not constantly being called upon.
Yeah, because you get, every time that little, buzz or whatever you get on your phone, you get a little dopamine push, right? It's a little excitement. And you see this in school when kids in the classroom, they have a hard time putting that phone away because again, they're so, in fact, they've had studies where just having it on the desk decreases your ability to focus on whatever it is you're doing because that part of your brain is just constantly waiting for that next little hit to come up. So yeah, I mean, when I go out, I don't carry my phone with me. People say, "What? What? You don't carry your phone?" Well, if it's important, people will get in touch with me. Most things can wait. It's like I used to say when I was teaching classes. If your grandmother's died or something like that, that's important. But 99.9% of the stuff you're getting to can wait for an hour. Doesn't have to be dealt with right now.
No, I mean I think that is definitely true for the vast majority of people. Um, that's not always true in my case because the speed of business never stops, and
Well, that's true.
I'm the only one right now, so I have to, I have to deal with it all. But I think that's true for the vast majority of people, even other people who do what I do. I think it's a different
Mhm.
it's a different situation, and you can align yourself differently with it. And it is important to break away. You know,
Right.
I'm a big fan of that, to be like, to kind of take off from that, get away from it, ignore it. Once the evening time comes, I tend to deal with it less, to be kind of like, well, that's a tomorrow Cameron problem.
You're right. And that's good. That's good. That's important.
Yes, I think there's a lot of people who don't. I agree with you, who don't take that time. When it comes to, because in the presser it says overcoming DNA and upbringing and all this type of thing. Why do you think so many people are stuck in the same emotional patterns they've always been stuck in and can never seem to escape?
Well, part of it's because so much of our behavior is unconscious, and we just are an automatic pilot. And a lot of people don't really realize that there's something that they can do. That's another part of it. I mean, certainly there's a lot more information. When I first started private practice, I worked with anxiety disorders, and people would come in, they'd been having panic attacks and stuff for 20, 30 years. And by the end of that, because of the awareness that was built, I'd have people come in where their first panic attack was like 3 months ago, which was great because that was a much easier fix than somebody where it becomes so entrenched in their life and permeated every part of what they did. So I think awareness is part of it. I think the other part again is just we are on an automatic pilot. We don't really watch ourselves or think about why we're doing what we're doing most of the day, which is, good because it's important to be thinking about what I'm going to have for lunch and, you know, what program I'm going to watch or who I'm going to talk to. But we just, again, we do things without realizing what we're doing. In fact, that's one of the things to change is identifying the pattern and putting a name on it. Because if you got a name on it, now I can think about it, and now I will recognize it when it comes up.
No, absolutely. It's my nana is always talking about it needs to have a name so that we can think about it more specifically. So it's no, I think that's quite good. That's quite good. When it comes to, I know you do marriage and family stuff. When it comes to romantic relationships, how do anxiety disorders and this emotional dysregulation affect people in marriages and relationships?
Well, it's interesting because there's something called state specific learning, and that means that behaviors will emerge when you're in a situation that resembles where you learned it the first time. And with newly married people, you see this, their behavior at home tends to be more young, I will say, than their behavior at work. It's because they learned how to behave at work when they were older and they were adults. And when they get together as a couple, they're pulling on behaviors and patterns that they learned when they were quite young. And if they grew up in a healthy family, of course, those will be fairly healthy. If they grew up in a really dysfunctional family, then that's how they'll start to relate to one another. And so I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, but that's what you see a lot. Just to give you an example, I had a person I was working with who, whenever his wife would make a suggestion about something, he would just he'd go ballistic. He just had a hard time with that and talked about it. It turned out that his mom was very critical of him. And so when his wife would make a suggestion, he felt as if it was his mom criticizing him at an unconscious level, right? I mean, he knew she wasn't his mom. But what we did is we did a simple thing called what's happening, what's real. And when he would start to get angry, of course, the first step is to just shut your mouth and give yourself time to calm down, process. And then he would say, well, wait a minute. What I'm doing is I'm reacting to my wife when she's just suggesting this color would look good on my shirt as if it's my mom criticizing me. She's not my mom, she's my wife. And she really wants what's good for me. And over time, he would desensitize to where he got to where he would not react to her anymore. That's the type of desensitization once you kind of make the connection that you can do.
No, I think that's very interesting, bringing it into sort of a conscious mind to consciously change patterns
Mm-hmm.
and all this type of thing. Um, there's a lot of complaints, I will say,
Mm-hmm.
people who take issue with the sudden increase in ADHD, the sudden increase in, mental health issues, all this type of thing. Um, what do you think about our present? I don't want to say we have a mental health crisis in this country, but
Mm.
there are some people that would say that we do. What do you think about our present, state of mental health in this country?
Well, I think there's some really positive things, and that people are able to identify the things that are uh, legitimate problems. And I think things like ADHD and the whole neurodiverse community that's out there, just recognizing that people operate differently is useful. At the same time, a lot of our institutions are designed where they don't really accommodate that. I mean, it used to be when kids would go to school, um, if they weren't academically inclined, they could go back out and work on the farm. In fact, when I was a kid, you could go work at a gas station, you could work in the factory, the canning factory down the road, and all kinds of opportunities. There's not those opportunities right now. Where can a child work, or a teenager, I should say, other than McDonald's or some kind of fast food? There's not a lot of opportunities. And with the whole AI thing coming out, taking away a lot of jobs that are menial and don't require a lot of complexity, that's going to get worse over the next 20 years. And so I think part of the problem is people who don't quite fit in to the round hole, that or the square peg, they don't have as many places that they can plug into. Where it used to be that there's a lot of things you could do, like ADHD people, like my son. A lot of times they're great with their hands. They're great with mechanical. They think outside the box really well. In fact, that's part of what got him into trouble a lot in school. Uh, and it's taken him a while to find his niche because, again, the whole idea nowadays, you go to college, you get this white collar job, and even that's kind of blowing up now with the artificial intelligence. A lot of that stuff just doesn't fit. We had more opportunity for people to do different things, especially physical things and things that didn't require you to have a lot of math skills or language skills. And so I think there's a narrowing of how you can fit in today that has created some of the problem as well.
Yes, no, I myself have struggled in my life, which is kind of how I ended up doing this.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a little kid, I'm autistic and ADHD,
Okay.
plus I'm a person of color. So as far as society concerned, I'm not even on the totem pole anymore. I'm the
Right.
scrap wood behind the construction of the totem pole.
Right.
Um, and so, like, I struggled as a kid because I always had what my mother would lovingly refer to as the Cameron twist. I had very odd and strange ways of doing things that made sense to no one else but me.
Right.
Um, which I now am kind of like, oh yeah, that was an early sign there, mom. Um, and and all this sort of thing. And so it's very it's been a struggle because I mean, I came out of the recession 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and I was obsolete.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just telling my mom this morning, I said, people like me are dinosaurs. In 20 years, we
Yeah.
won't exist. I have a background in the classics. I studied Greek, I studied Latin.
Okay.
I've studied languages. I speak French and German because I was going to go to law school and become an international lawyer. So I was picking
Okay.
up languages because my
Right.
master's degree is in political science. And the listener already knows this. I'm boring you. But um, uh, and I came out and all of a sudden, nobody wanted the humanities. had 2 degrees in political science. Nobody wants the humanities. Laws oversaturated. Who needs to speak languages when Google Translate is available? All of these things. And I told my mom this morning, I said, people like me are dinosaurs. We won't exist in 20 years. People with my old-fashioned classical background in philosophy and all of these things, the economy has spoken. I'm
Mm.
no longer needed or necessary. I'm out of date. And that if I were 20 years older, it probably wouldn't bother me as much. But at
Mm.
35, it
Right.
feels so daunting to be kind of like, well, what am I going to do with myself for the next 30 years?
Yeah.
One wonders. Because people like me just aren't needed anymore. And I
and
think there's going to be a lot of people like that now,
it's going
where
to
it's
be
just
an
like,
increasing problem. Yes.
yeah, like people, with a lot of us have backgrounds that just aren't fit for this time where we are at technologically and all this type of thing. We're anachronisms. We're from a different era.
And actually, you find the population is, in a sense, dumbing down because they are becoming so dependent upon things like Google Translator or, in class. The kids can't do multiplication. They don't know how to do 2 times 8 or something of that nature. Well, they got to pull out their calculator to do it. And we're becoming so dependent upon our machines that in many ways people are much less intelligent than they used to be. You look at
Oh, that
somebody.
was like the thing in third grade when I was a kid. How
Oh,
well have
yeah.
you memorized your multiplication tables? And,
Right. Yeah.
how many hours we all spent writing them out to do them from memory and
Oh,
all
yeah.
this type
Yeah.
of thing. Yeah.
It used to be people had to memorize vast quantities of things just to survive. I mean, you go even to like a hunting culture, they've got to know maybe 500 different plants. They need to know trails, they need to know where water's at, all this type of stuff. They exercise their brain a lot. And part of the problem you see with a lot of people nowadays is they're just not exercising their brain much. They rely on their computers and their smartphones. They go home, they get anesthetized by entertainment.
Yeah, I
and
mean, I always say people have paid me a compliment by saying you're one of the few people that still actually knows things.
Yeah.
Because, like, I'll do an appearance and I will quote Churchill or
Oh,
Plutarch,
yeah.
and people, it's the biggest parlor trick. When I was growing up, memorizing quotes was something we did for fun. Like,
Right.
that was a cute thing that we did. Nowadays, I can blow people away by accurately quoting great thinkers because nobody does that anymore.
Yeah.
Why would you? It's a Google search away. Like,
Yeah.
it's just, and so for me, it always feels like, you know, I don't know. I feel like maybe I need to pick up a heroin habit or something. I don't know, because it seems like I'm just not going to. I'm kind of no longer needed.
Well, you'll find a niche because there's still people that still enjoy somebody who has a keen intellect. So, but
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a difficult
it's
thing.
part of the problem. Part of the problem that our society is learning to deal with. Right? How do I unplug from all this stuff and not just be a blob absorbing entertainment and stimulation and actually start to think and have some kind of influence in my life?
Well, I mean, I think at some level that's kind of what people have always wanted. I think there's always been a certain segment of society that was engaged and the vast majority who weren't, and now I think the segment of society that is engaged is smaller, and the
Mhm.
number of people who kind of, for better or for worse, don't give a shit has increased. And I'm at the front line of this because when I post content, I am always fascinated by what people engage with and is popular and what never gets anywhere.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
there's sometimes where I will do, super serious, important stuff, 10 views. I do a silly TikTok trend,
Yeah.
1,000 views. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
well, that was easy. Yeah, I mean, and there's this, I think that's just kind of where I think it's overwhelming to a lot of people. I think it's exhausting. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of people, for better or for worse, we may not like it, but I think it's the true. Um, I don't think people care that much.
Well, I'd agree. There is a lot of apathy. You see that in the people that get elected, both sides of the party. There's an announcer that I like. He says that they're the C-minus students, right? And yet
Yeah.
they can entertain and they connect with people, and that's on a lot of different levels. I
Oh yeah,
used to,
no, most people in
yeah,
entertainment are never were academically accomplished, barely graduated high school. I used to do stand-up comedy.
great.
And I was unusual. So stand-up comedians come in two flavors. You're
Mm.
either completely barely graduated high school or you went to Harvard, like
Right.
Conan. And there's
Right.
no in between. Like you're either you've gotten so smart that you laugh at a fart joke, or you have always been laughing at fart jokes because you never got smart enough for that to not be funny. And
Right.
there's absolutely no middle ground. And so people were always kind of like, oh, well, of course you're funny because you're super smart and all this type of thing. I'm like, I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but yeah, I think that's, that's just kind of where it, where it's at. The joke used to go, A students go into the professions, B students go into business, and C students all either become artists or start businesses and hire the B students.
Right.
That was the old adage back in the day. So, and as near as I can tell, based upon where my friends have ended up, that is still pretty true. You
Mm.
know, I never did as for as many degrees as I have, I never did that terribly well
Mm.
academically. I was always a middling B and C student. Um, Mostly because a lot of stuff wasn't interesting. I had my own take and perspective on things. I did my undergrad degree in 2.5 years, so that didn't necessarily leave me a whole lot of time for stuff and all this type of thing. And lo and behold, I started my own business and I'm doing my own thing. And after autism diagnosis, I figured out that a lot of these institutions and things were not going to ever be good for me or be helpful, or I was never going to fit in. So I better do my own thing, and hence the
Mm.
Cameron Journal. So
Yeah.
it's a very difficult thing. So,
Mm.
but what I mean, how do we? I feel like there's a systemic societal thing. What can we do to change society to start to mitigate some of these difficulties? Where do we start?
It starts with individuals. It always does. So many of the ways that we've tried to solve problems from the government on down just quite frankly don't work. We go through all kinds of examples of that. It, People have to be connected with one-on-one. They have to have things like this program, or my book, or people, local institutions. It used to be you had churches, community groups, and things and stuff that people could plug into and get a lot of this type of input. And again, a lot of that's missing now. But the individuals, you have to start reaching people on an individual level, and big programs usually don't do that very well.
Yeah, I mean that is, and I feel like I feel like we need a national, I feel like we need something to encourage people to reach out and create that community engagement, like especially like on the left there's a big talk about, oh, we need sustainable communities and we need to come together and do mutual aid and all this type of thing. And
Mm.
and people get mad at me when I say, if our society was built for that, it would already exist.
Right.
It doesn't exist. So what does that tell you? Our society is not built for that. The ingredients are not there. So I think like maybe we need to change the ingredients. Who knows?
Well, and I think there's, we go through a lot of interesting cycles when you look back at history and how people have, dealt with one another. Um, Part of it, it gets back into those three things that give people satisfaction in life. Relationships we talked about was one.
Yeah.
The other one was next one is purpose, a reason to get up in the morning. And the third one is the one that we're struggling with right now, and that's meaning. What is the purpose of life? Why am I here? Is there something after I die, or is this all I got? Um, that's something, and that's why people jump on to things like environmentalism, or some of the things that you were mentioning. That actually becomes kind of their religion, and that's where they're getting their meaning out of life. And to some degree, that works. It does not help to satisfy when somebody dies, or you have a catastrophic accident, or some other kind of major impact happens in your life. You need some kind of existential belief beyond that, about your existence. Frankl, in his search for meaning, when he came out of the Nazi concentration camps. He talked a lot about that the people had purpose and a sense of meaning in their life. They did just a lot better under the harshest conditions that you can experience.
Yeah, that's definitely something I have always struggled with. Never really felt I had a purpose. Never necessarily nothing in my life has ever felt terribly meaningful.
Mm.
I keep going for people. I mean, it's, the readership and the fans, they're the ones that keep me going.
Mm-hmm.
That's literally it. Left to my own devices, I would probably have stopped a long time ago. Um, because everything does at some point kind of seem a little bit pointless. And uh it is quite difficult when society has discarded you
Right.
to get any motivation to do anything.
One of the things that I found had a big impact on me is some of Moody's work back when he first published his Life After Life book
Mm.
with the whole near death experiences and the whole national international institutions that have arisen after that, where they start tracking that. I quote a study by some scientists on that in the book, and they talk about it when they got done looking at all of these hundreds of experiences. They couldn't explain it, and they just basically came up and said, "Well, there's something there. We're not going to try to put a name on it or explain it, but the traditional things of the dying brain, and the last gasp, they don't make sense since there's no brain waves, there's no heartbeat, yet these people are explaining things that sometimes you can go out and actually verify things that are going on in the next room or miles away, and so, me personally, I believe there's something after you die. Now, where you go after that, we get into that, that whole metaphysical range. But I think spending some time to look at that is important. I mean, I look at my degree was in biology, and right now biology is in a real crisis over how life came about. We can't explain it. All the soup theories of the last century or the 20th century, they've all fallen apart. None of that stuff works. I get a kick out of these people that talk about billions and billions of planets and stuff out there when the vast majority of them could not support life. There's so many unique things that occurred. How do you explain that stuff? And most people, they look at life again from a very materialistic perspective. I'm just a little organic machine, and when I die, that's it. But if there is something, okay, maybe that's something I need to think about and decide how does that work into my life and my relationship to other people and the things that I do. So I really encourage people to explore some of that because it gets you thinking in some directions that maybe you haven't thought about before. And whether that takes you to traditional religion or whether that takes you to some other type of a spiritual or existential place, I think it's useful to take that journey.
Yeah, I think most importantly, and I found this of myself, it's never going to come from an outside force.
Mm-hmm.
The only place it's going to come from is within yourself. If you're looking for it to kind of fall down from the heavens, it's not coming. So put your bucket away because there's nothing to catch. Um, so I think it is important to kind of find that for yourself. I find as I'm slowly but surely plodding towards midlife, um, that I wrote an article last year called "Why All of My Friends Over 40 Are Unhappy," and talking about happiness curves that the bottom is about 40 to 45, and then things start to improve. Um, and I was thinking, like, I think that's what's so like prescient at this time of life is your purpose, your meaning, your values. um I have a lot of friends who had kids young, their kids are now leaving, it's turning
Mm-hmm.
their whole lives upside down. This is the first time they
Right.
haven't had kids at home since the Bush administration. And
All right.
so and I have and then I also have others who are still have small children, and or their children are starting to grow up and they're reaching the end of that time of their lives. And so everyone's just kind of like, oh my God, what's next? What's happening? What are we going to do? Everybody's getting divorced. Oh my goodness.
Right.
Five different of my friends divorces this over the past 3 years. So many divorces. So that's also, totally changing things up for everybody. I think like the age I'm at right now is a very confusing time. Lot to figure out. But I think that purpose and meaning piece is really important.
It is, and again, my experience of that period of my life was very different. People I hung around with, and I mean, I'll be married 50 years next year,
Oh,
so
congratulations.
and all of my friends are that way, and it's interesting how you surround yourself with people that mirror where you're at in life. But I think, generally speaking, because people they'd settled some of those questions earlier on in their life, and it gave them a framework for navigating through those things. It became important.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that is definitely very true. I think that's where, that's probably where, yeah, if you're religious, it helps. That really is very helpful.
Mm.
Um, some of us grew
And
up
again,
religious and left that behind and never again. But
well,
yeah, I mean, I
and
think it's a very
it
difficult thing.
doesn't have to be a traditional religion. There's a lot of roads to spirituality if you want to use that. I mean, I use the word your existential beliefs because a lot of people, that's easier for people. Your beliefs about my existence.
Yeah.
Doesn't have to be traditional. People can come up with a lot of different ways to settle some of those questions that give them, again, a framework to manage through just a lot of the crazy stuff that comes up in life and some of the changes. And I think part of the problem too is people have too idealistic expectations about what should be. Like, and you talked about all the divorces. People have expectations about, my mate satisfying all my needs.
Not
Not going to
possible.
happen.
No,
You know.
I figured that out with like, in fact, I told my ex-girlfriend, she was here a couple months ago, and I was saying, I think monogamy is a wonderful idea. It's a
Mhm.
great ideal. It is a beautiful lie. It doesn't work because I've watched all of the, I mean, I have friends with, marriages that have fallen apart, are falling apart. People aren't having
Mhm.
sex anymore, all this type of thing. I said, I think we have a lot of ideas about relationships in this country,
Mhm.
and a lot of them are a lot of lies. And I think you really have to open and expand your mind and find out what's going to work with the person that you're with.
And I
And
think
I and
if
I
you
say that as someone, I'm a hopeless Romeo and Juliet romantic,
right, right,
and I grew up in a very traditional world where you got married, you had children, you waited for sex until marriage. I mean, I bring a lot of like religious baggage to this conversation.
right.
And so for me, I think I just had so many misconceptions of what a relationship had to be, what it looked like, all this type of thing. You know, what my parents modeled, but that was dysfunctional, um, because of who they are and some of the mental health issues they have. And and then for me, I pile in racial issues, neurodivergency,
Mhm.
all this type of thing. And well, let's put it this way. That's why I'm single at 35.
Yeah,
And it's been and I look at being like, our relationships for me, maybe probably not. And I think it's a very difficult thing. But I do strongly think you have to figure out the relationship with the person you're with, and all the stuff
right.
that you think relationships should be away. Like that's one of the great things about autism is it kind of made me dump all the fantasies, all the delusions, all the ideas I had about things. And it's just like, that's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Lay it aside. What do we
Mhm.
have in front of us?
And I think one of the problems is
Dicey.
so many people go into relationships nowadays with the expectation, we'll see if it works and we'll stay together as long as, I'm happy. And then when I get unhappy or you're just not fit in the bill, then I'll move on to something else. And if you go into with that expectation, you don't work through the hard times. Because every relationship, you have that honeymoon stage where it's wonderful, everything's perfect in this person, and then you have that kind of next stage where you start realizing, well, gee, there are some flaws here, and you have to work out the rules, negotiate. Who's going to turn the heater down at night? How are we going to do this and that? Oh, where do the forks go? I usually put them over here, and if you get through all that stuff and you kind of start to work through some of the problems that you're having with a person, that's when you actually hit some real intimacy. And a lot of people never get there. They either stay in that honeymoon stage until they hit that kind of stage where the person's not measuring up to who they think they are, and then they leave at that stage. And the reason why a lot of people break up after their kids leave is because they haven't fed into the marriage. They go through that honeymoon stage, and now they're occupied with kids and they're occupied with work. They have not invested in the relationship, and now the kids leave and they look at each other and they say, "Who is this?"
I have, it's funny you say that. I have two couples. That's exactly what happened. The
Yep.
minute the kids moved out, that marriage crumbled faster than a beach
Yep.
sandcastle. And I have another couple whose kids are middle grade right now, and I see it coming. I'm like,
Yep.
and what's funny is and this one couple, literally, they're both staying together for the kids,
Right.
but neither one of them will tell the other one that's what they're doing. And I'm kind of
Yep.
like, oh, the minute your oldest moves out, your marriage is falling apart. Like because
Yep.
I've seen how this story ends by
That's a
people 10
common.
years farther down
Yep.
the road. And
Yep.
it's just it is really it has really changed my perspective on romance and relationships and everything else. And that's why I think I don't know where I am with all that right now cuz my whole view has shifted.
See, that gets back to purpose, right? If my purpose is to raise my kids, once the kids leave, gee, now I got to find something else, right?
Right.
And that's why investing in the relationship, which is not done by so many people nowadays, is so important. And really getting to know that person at a deep level and spending time with that person, because that's the key to relationship is time. If you want to have a relationship with somebody, you have to invest in them. And of course, when I'm working with singles, one of the things I always mention is when you meet somebody, first thing you want to take evaluate is this person capable of the intimacy that you want? Are you capable of it? And that's a big question that people don't ask, and so they oftentimes end up with somebody who's just doesn't have the capacity to be who they want them to be, or to meet them on the level that they want to be met.
Yeah, I definitely fall into the latter for sure.
Mm,
Um, I again very old fashioned, so I'm very gentlemanly. I pay for dinner. I take care of the bill. Me and my ex, when in our last relationship, I paid all the bills because she was
mm,
not working and she has chronic issues that make it very difficult for her to work regular income. So I was paying for everything. And I had no issue with that whatsoever. Like I had a
mm,
therapist who brought it up, and I'm kind of like, no, I knew what I was signing up for. Like we're not going to talk
mm,
about that. I knew what I was signing up for. I understood her financial situation when we started doing this. It's fine. Like I
mm.
went into that eyes wide open and never complained, never explained, never bitched about it. I knew what I was signing up for. Fine. Um, but when it
But
comes, but here's the problem: is when you're the one taking care of everything and you're the
yeah,
one doing everything, and then they come along and are kind of like, "Oh, I wish you would be more fun or more playful or more spontaneous or whatever have you." I'm like, do you have any idea how many things I have done today to make sure our life continues to function? Things that you do not do, don't even know that's going on, all this
yeah,
type of thing. You want me to just be spontaneous and have fun and all this type of thing? Let me write you a to do list of several things I'm going to need you to take care of so that
mm,
we will continue to have a life and a place to live and all
yeah,
of this type of
yeah.
thing. Like it is a very difficult thing, and that is, as her and I have re-engaged, that is something that I continue to talk about, to be kind of like, I can do that, but I need to feel like someone's watching the shop.
See, that's that rule negotiation stage that I mentioned that happens after the honeymoon stage. You
Yeah,
start
well,
having to negotiate.
we've already had
Yeah,
the relationship, the honeymoon
yeah,
stage, the awful breakup where I moved back
yeah,
across the country during a pandemic. So we're already at that kind of like, okay,
yeah,
if we're gonna do this again, we need to not do any of these 10 things that we did the last time that we know didn't work.
yeah.
Because like we already did that.
You're negotiating the rules of the relationship now. You're renegotiating them.
Yeah, and it's just something was like it's like I need someone who's watching the shop. And
Right.
what's interesting is I can say that in plain language, but that doesn't ever get me the okay, so what do you need from me to feel safe enough to do that so you feel
Yeah.
like I'm participating in this?
Yeah.
It's always just kind of one of those things like, well, that's just the way you are. Get over it. It's like I run my own business, I pay my own bills. If I don't take care of that, I'll be out with the homeless in the tents tomorrow. I
Right.
live in Seattle. The tent camp is not far. It's across the street. Like, it's like I have to stay on top of things because if I
Mm.
don't, it all comes crashing down. There's not a safety net for me. I don't have a boss to call into. I don't have sick time, all this type of thing. So it makes it quite difficult.
No, I understand. I was in private practice for 20 years, and so I was the.
Yeah.
It was all on me.
Yeah, and it's a lot of, and I think it's a lot
Yeah.
of pressure. And I think people who I have other small business owner friends, and we talk about how our friends, our family do not understand the small business owner lifestyle.
No,
Like,
that's true. I agree with that completely.
yeah, and that just adds an extra layer of complexity. But anyway, let us go. This is turning into therapy, and we're not going to do that. We're still talking about your book, and I've made it all about me, for which I apologize. Um, why don't you let us know where we can buy your book to learn more about how to regulate our emotions and where we can find you online?
The easiest place is just my website, Why Emotions. So that's whyemotions.com, and you have links into where you can buy the audio, the ebooks, the print. It's on Amazon. I have links over to my YouTube channel. Got a bunch of stuff up over there. I've got some downloads for people if they want to download some different relaxation response MP4s and things of that nature, or MP3s rather. Um, so whyemotions.com, and that's where you can get why you feel the way you do.
Excellent. Well, if anybody needs to understand how good you are at what you do, they can just listen to this and listen to me spill my guts the whole time and you talk about it. And it's an endorsement. It's a live endorsement of how good this material is. So thank you so much for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast.